and welcome. Buenos dias, bienvenido. My name is Julia Berkey. I am the senior pastor here at Orchard Ridge United Church of Christ. And we are gathered here as Wisconsin faith community, gathered here in body and in spirit at this press conference to call for a just and humane immigration system. This is pressing at any time, and recently, as wildfire smoke continues to billow from Canada down to the United States, as heat soars, record-breaking numbers in the south, as floods wipe out roads in the east, we come face to face, if we were not already, with our climate emergency, which is already and will continue to force migration from all over the world, especially the global south. And we as a nation need to be poised to welcome and to have our laws and immigration system reflect the good nature of our faith communities that say, all are welcome. Every human being is a reflection of God. In her book, Nomad Century, environmentalist journalist Gaia Vince argues that human migration and immigration is not one of the greatest geopolitical problems to solve of our time, but is instead the solution that we need to embrace to make room in our climate-changed world. She says each one of us has a nomadic soul perched within us, and we need to embrace and make room for our global community as a migratory species. And it's one of our greatest strengths as a species, to know when it's time to move, when there's danger, to go to more hospitable lands. Let us be the more hospitable lands. We gather as people of faith to speak prophetically to our government, to welcome the stranger because God dwells in the stranger, and they are our siblings. And as a nation, we need our laws to reflect this radical welcome. I want to introduce our next speaker, Mark Peters, who comes to us from Milwaukee today, who is a faith-based organizer. Mark, come on forward.
Thank you, Pastor Julia. I just want to say a few words about political and moral shame. And I just want to preface it by saying when I'm talking about political figures, there's one political figure today who I don't dignify by saying the person's name, but you'll know who I'm referring to. And when it comes to moral shame, I'm restricting my comments to my own faith community, the Christian and the Catholic traditions. I'll let other people who are here today speak to other traditions if they wish. But I just ask, how is it that when a Republican president gutted our immigration system, candidate Joe Biden called it a moral and national shame? But 3 years later, he maintains many of those same policies. He promised that his administration would make the immigration system fair, orderly, and humane. But now he's silent, as his administration has adopted the exact same approach, albeit perhaps with less ugly rhetoric. But at least his predecessor was honest about his intentions. President Biden talks about human rights, but is in daily violation of international laws that this country agreed to decades ago, and which every president, up until the last two, abided by. President Biden, shame on you. And every Democrat who criticized Republicans for such policies, but are now silent when their own president does it, shame on you as well. But these are politicians concerned more with getting elected than doing the morally right thing. As I see it, the greatest shame of all is reserved for those people of faith who do not follow their own moral principles. And I see so many so-called Christians who are failing to speak up on behalf of our brothers and sisters, despite what Pastor Julia said about the forces that are causing them to do this. For Christians, they deny what's in Matthew 25, that in the stranger is our Lord. And if we reject any stranger, we're rejecting him. This just doesn't seem to bother half of our people. But not just the people in the pews, the bishops and denominational leadership bodies, many of whom in the past have put out full-throated defenses of migrants, has become curiously muted. As a lifelong Catholic who worked in the Milwaukee Archdiocese for 35 years, I used to be extremely proud of the Church's advocacy for immigrants. But since 2016, I've been asking, where is the voice of our Archbishop and other leaders as our system has become more unjust than any time since the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882? Would that we would see just a little of the same passion he brings to the abortion issue on behalf of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. Would that the U.S. bishops as a body exhibit the compassion of Pope Francis instead of spending their energies keeping women out of ordained ministry. And I do just want to say that, it's sad that a tiny little group like Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice has to sponsor a press conference like this, and are thrilled to have two small outlets here to cover it. But there's larger faith-based organizations, interfaith organizations, Catholic organizations of every stripe. They ought to be holding these press conferences. And ABC and NBC and CNN ought to be covering them. But here we are. So once again, we are calling upon people in communities of faith to stop wasting their energy on doctrinal differences and institutional issues. But history will shame us.
Hello everybody. Today we gather to call upon the Bible to lead bold and courageous action to improve our immigration system. We urge the Biden administration to end the 287G program, nationwide and work towards comprehensive immigration reform that protects the rights and the dignity of all immigrants. Or in the immediate possibility of ending this program in 2 of the 8 counties where this program is still currently active in Wisconsin. In addition, we recognize that the Wisconsin Safe Roads Coalition has been the tireless advocate for the right for immigrant workers in Wisconsin to obtain driver's license. We recognize that legally and safe is not only essential for our livelihood and our mobility, inclusion and full participation in our society. The Wisconsin Safe Roads Coalition is working hard to advocate for the introduction. Together, we can achieve significant changes and build a more just and humane future. I am an immigrant myself from Honduras, and I asked my parents once, "What is your favorite memory of living in Honduras?" To which they responded, "Growing up and feeling safe. Safe to go around my block, safe to go around La Pulperia, safe to go and visit friends and family. The safety where neighbors open their garages after Sunday church, where we can go out and play in the street where adults all talk." That's the Honduras I could not give you or your sister. Let our voices be heard. Let us remain united in solidarity. Let us continue to work together to build an immigration system that reflects the humanity and spirit of our nation. Thank you to each and one of you for your commitment and your support.
Buenos días, honrando a nuestros compañeros de habla hispana también. Queremos mencionar este statement en español y dice así: hoy nos hemos reunido para hacer un llamado a la administración electos para crear un sistema de inmigración justo y humano en los Estados Unidos. Posibilidades inmediatas de poner fin a este programa en 2 de los 8 condados que actualmente está activo este programa en Wisconsin. Además, reconocemos que la coalición para las vías seguras de Wisconsin está haciendo un arduo e incansable trabajo para que los inmigrantes de Wisconsin obtengan su licencia de conducir. Reconocemos que la capacidad de conducir, de manejar legalmente y segura, no solo es esencial para el sustento y la movilidad, sino también para la inclusión, la participación plena en nuestra sociedad. La Coalición para Vías Seguras de Wisconsin sigue trabajando arduamente para abogar por la introducción de una legislación muy necesaria en el otoño de este año 2023 para que sean otorgados derechos básicos a nuestros valiosos trabajadores inmigrantes. No podemos permitir que el miedo y la injusticia sigan definiendo nuestras políticas migratorias. Debemos luchar por un sistema que refleje nuestros valores de inclusión, respeto y justicia para todos. Juntos podemos lograr cambios significativos y construir un futuro más justo y humano. Que nuestras voces sean escuchadas, que sigamos unidos en solidaridad y que continuemos trabajando juntos para construir un sistema de inmigración que refleje la humanidad y el espíritu de esta nación. Gracias a cada uno de ustedes por su compromiso y apoyo.
And now, let's welcome Reverend Nick Uphall, pastor at Madison Christian Community Advent Lutheran Church.
Thank you both. Gracias. In 2016, my congregation was preparing to assist immigrants threatened with deportation because of rhetoric expecting that things would be getting much worse. But we quickly heard from the immigrant community that things had always been bad, and indeed they haven't gotten much better in the last couple of years. Some of that involves intentionally continuing poor and prejudicial practices, and some has involved new ways to make more difficult lives that have already involved terrible amounts of suffering. Facing such a convoluted and repressive system, our congregation didn't know much and briefly wondered if that lack of expertise precluded our involvement. Hearing the desperate hardships, however, we've continued to try to respond even as some of the most urgent needs have evolved for migrants and refugees and asylum seekers and those who are here. The people who may seem very different and feel frequently far away from us and our daily lives, yet we hear a call to offer what we can, to pay attention to what we must. This spring, one of our young adults traveled on a border immersion experience. Afterward, her presentation for us about the situation at the border shocked, saddened, and angered many of our members. And so it also renewed their desire to help how we can, in contributing to immediate relief and assistance, as well as calling on our government to do better. There's often debate and rhetoric about being a so-called Christian nation, which I would dispute. In positive terms, I suppose that intends to claim the better angels of our nature. As a Christian in this nation, it also makes me realize and declare that I cannot abide policies or attitudes built on fear or disgust, much less ignorant complacency. Our scriptures are filled with calls to love our neighbor and to welcome the stranger, to notice those who have been overlooked, to attend to hurts and harms and seek to alleviate them. That grounding in faith reinforces for me that God's grace cannot shut out people and their needs. And so I'm grateful to join today with other people of faith and devotion in realizing for the sake of our beliefs, we must raise our voices in advocacy, and we must commit our lives on behalf of serving God's desire to sustain life that is truly life. Thank you. Next, I'll invite Kelly Asquith-Jackson.
My name is Kelly Asquith-Jackson. I am one of the ministers of the First Unitarian Society of Madison. We are Unitarian Universalists, a rarely discussed and fairly marginal religious movement. So when we need to explain ourselves to other people, we usually talk about our two most key basic insights as religious people. That every human person has an irreducible, unexchangeable, irreplaceable, and infinite value, and that all of our lives are connected to all of our lives, that I cannot be fully myself unless you also get to be fully who you are. These are very, very simple, usually not terribly controversial positions, and yet they lead us into the increasingly controversial consequences of believing that if those two things are true, then no accident of birth, no violent, dehumanizing rhetoric, no policy, and no practice of hatred, contempt, or prejudice can actually make someone else's life less important than mine. Yes. And given that as a beginning point, we don't have a choice. We don't have an option about whether or not to look away from the deeply dehumanizing, at times murderous treatment of people trying to enter into this particular land that I have the privilege of having been born into out of necessity and the desire for a full life for themselves and their children. There just isn't an option to look away. And yet, each day in this country, that is consistently the position of a large number of our elected leaders, to look away, to invite us to look away. And in addition to the fact that it leads to the destruction and death of other human lives, which should be enough to motivate us, but somehow continues not to be. In addition to that, it also contributes to the continuing moral corrosion of our country. To stand idly by while actions that dehumanize, defame, and often destroy the lives of people who simply happen to have been born in another place than I did, have no other quality to distinguish themselves besides that. That activity continues to escalate while our leaders continue either not to act or to actively support it. I'm going to close there before I get too animated in my comments. And I'm going to toss it over to Rabbi Bonnie Margulis, who's the Executive Director of Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice.
Good morning. As Kelly said, I am Rabbi Bonnie Margulis, Executive Director of Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice and the organizer for the Dane Sanctuary Coalition. The Dane Sanctuary Coalition came together in 2017 in response to the immoral immigration policies of our government and works to create a just and humane immigration system for all. The Dane Sanctuary Coalition now consists of 21 congregations, including the one we are in today, and 7 organizations that stand ready to offer sanctuary to undocumented immigrants who are at imminent risk for deportation. I don't know about you, but I'm horrified at what's going on in our country. The headline in Monday's Houston Chronicle read, "Texas troopers told to push children into the Rio Grande, deny waters to migrants." The same day, NBC News reported detainees and advocates decry horrific conditions at Louisiana ICE Detention Center. In March, 38 migrants died in a detention center in Ciudad Juarez across the border from El Paso because the officers in charge would not let them out when the fire broke out. Our immigration system is designed to be as cruel, as heartless, as inhumane as possible in order to deter people from attempting to enter this country. That's not what we want our country to be about. We should be welcoming people into this country from all the corners of the earth. We should be celebrating the rich diversity they bring with them, rejoicing in the fact that this country, which we love, is a beacon of hope to desperate people throughout the world, and embracing the truth that we need these new people to enter into our workforce, to build our economy. And the truth is, these policies of deterrence simply don't work. They don't reflect the reality of people's lives, the violence they face in their home countries, the grinding poverty, the persecution from their own governments, the civil unrest, and the effects of climate change. The factors that lead people to leave their homes, their families, their culture, everything they know, and travel a long and dangerous path to come to a country where they don't speak the language, they don't understand the culture, and they have to start from scratch to build a new life. These factors are too severe to keep even the harshest policies to keep people away.
Yes.
Let me be clear. We're not advocating for open borders. Every country deserves to keep its citizens safe from those who wish to do them harm, and to set reasonable limits on who can enter and how many can enter in any given year. But this, the richest country in the world, should live up to the promise that is inscribed on the Statue of Liberty, to be a refuge for those tired, those poor, those tempest-tossed people who are yearning to breathe free. As people of faith, the members of Wisconsin Faith Voices for Justice and the Dane Sanctuary Coalition believe in the inherent worth and dignity of every human being and their right to live a life of safety in circumstances that allow them to thrive. For this reason, 163 people of faith and 34 different faith communities and organizations have signed on to our statement, calling upon our elected officials to create a just and humane immigration system. We invite all of Wisconsin to join with us in this call. Thank you for being with us today. Thank you all so much for coming out. Please call your congresspeople and tell